Risk consulting. My father said the two words like they were something he'd found stuck to the bottom of his shoe, and the whole ballroom heard him. Because the man had never in his life learned to lower his voice. I was standing near the back of the Liberty Grand, holding a glass of warm Chardonnay. I had no intention of drinking when it happened. The Ontario Engineering Awards dinner is a stiff, glittering thing. 800 people in rented tuxedos, a podium, a slideshow, butter tarts on the dessert table, because somebody on the committee always insists. I had been invited because I was getting an award, the Excellence in Public Safety Medal, for catching a foundation defect on the Humber Transit expansion that, the citation said, would have failed within the decade and likely killed people. I had flown nobody in. I had told no one in my family I was even nominated. I came alone, the way I did most things. And then my father stood up. He was 3 tables from the front, the place of honor, because of course he was. Half the towers you can see from the Gardner have his firm's name buried somewhere in the structural drawings. He's a legend. People still ask him to bless their projects like he's a bishop. When he rose out of his chair, the room went quiet on instinct, the way a classroom goes quiet when the principal opens the door, and the MC, some poor associate dean reading off cue cards, just stopped. Before we hand out a medal for paperwork, my father said, and he was smiling, which was the worst part. I'd like the room to remember what an engineer actually does. We pour concrete, we carry load, we build the country. We do not sit in an office writing risk registers and feelings reports and telling real builders the sky is falling. He let that land. He was good at letting things land. He'd had a lifetime of practice. Forms don't hold up a bridge. Steel does. Some people forgot that. He did say my name. He didn't have to. 800 people had read the program. 800 heads did the same slow arithmetic and then turned, one section at a time, to find me at the back in my mother's pearl earrings, my whole body going cold from the feet up. I want to tell you, I stood there with dignity. I didn't. I felt 11 years old again. I felt 11 years old again. I felt like the dim one, the strange one, the daughter who read the coroner's inquest transcripts at the kitchen table while the rest of the family watched the Leafs lose. My brother was sitting at my father's right hand. He'd flown in from Calgary, our firm's Western VP now, the heir, the golden one. And he wasn't embarrassed. He had his arm draped over the back of his chair and a little smile on his face, and when our eyes met across that whole shining room, he gave me the smallest nod. Like a man watching a play he'd already read the ending to. So that's the first thing you should know about me. My own father stood up in front of every engineer in the province and called my life's work a feelings report, and my brother enjoyed it. What neither of them understood, what nobody in that room understood yet, was that I had spent 15 years training myself to find the one weak point in any structure that everybody else had decided to ignore. And I was about to turn that on them. A woman stood up at the head table before I could decide whether to run. I knew her the way every engineer in this country knows her. She designed water systems for half the north before most of those communities had a paved road. She'd sat on the inquiry after the Algo Center roof came down in Elliott Lake. The mall collapsed, the one that killed 2 people because a rusted-out support had been ignored for years, while everyone signed off and looked away. She was 81 years old, and she ran the discipline side of the Regulator now, and when she stood, the silence changed character completely. It got heavier. It got careful. She didn't look at the MC, she looked at my father. The defect she found on the Humber line, the old woman said in a voice that didn't rise at all, was buried under a stamped report your own firm submitted. She paused. She quoted what your engineers swore wasn't there. That was it. One sentence. I watched the color go out of my father's face like someone had pulled a plug. And then a man at a table near the front stood up. Just stood up and stayed standing, looking at me. Then a woman beside him. Then a whole table. Then a section. By the time I understood what was happening, 800 people were on their feet, and they were not applauding my father. My legs carried me to that stage without any instruction from my brain. I shook the old woman's hand. Her grip was dry and strong, and she leaned in and said, "Just for me, your grandfather would be unbearable about this." Because she had known him. Of course she had. Everyone of a certain age in this profession had known my mother's father, and that's a thread I have to pull back to the beginning for you because it's where all of it starts. My mother's maiden name was Sorensen, and that's the name I work under. Not my father's. People ask me about that all the time, and I let them assume it's a marriage thing. It isn't. I took it back at 23, the year I got my license, and I'll get to why. My grandfather, her father, was a rich man. He took the iron ring in 1958, that little band of rough iron they put on the pinky of your working hand at the ritual of the calling, the ceremony that exists in this country because a bridge over the St. Lawrence fell down twice while it was being built and killed dozens of men, and the profession decided it needed a permanent physical reminder that we hold lives in our hands, and our pride is the thing most likely to drop them. He wore that ring until the day he died. He was to take my small hand and run my fingertip over the rough edge of it and say, "The metal remembers so that you don't have to." I was 6. I had no idea what he meant. I just knew his voice went soft and serious when he said it, and his voice was never soft for anyone else. He left me his field notebooks, 40 years of them. My mother gave them to me the winter I was 10. The same winter the cancer started showing up in the way she got tired climbing the stairs, though we didn't know that yet. She sat on the edge of my bed with a stack of these cracked leather books, and she said, "Your father builds things big and fast, and everyone claps. Your grandfather built things slow and asked at every step what would happen if he was wrong." She tapped the cover of the top notebook. "This is the harder kind of smarts, sweetheart. Most people never learn it because nobody claps." I read every one of those notebooks, not the calculations. I couldn't follow those yet, but the margins. My grandfather wrote in the margins, "Doesn't sit right, came back Tuesday, still doesn't. Foreman swears it's fine. It's not fine." Pages of a man arguing with a building and usually winning and twice losing and writing down the names of the people who got hurt when he lost, so he'd never let it happen the same way again. That was the most important thing I ever learned, and it didn't come from a classroom. It came from the margins of a dead man's notebooks. The building is always telling you, you just have to be the kind of person who's willing to hear it. My father thought all of this was sentimental garbage. He laughed my brother, who at 14 could already read a stress diagram and talk a contractor down on price, who was loud and certain and built in his exact image. And he tolerated me, the quiet middle of his attention, the kid who wanted to know why the Hyatt walkways in Kansas City came down and killed 114 people at a tea dance. The kid who asked at dinner whether anyone had checked the connection details on his new project and got told to stop reading horror stories and go set the table. My mother died of February I was 16. She held on through Christmas because she wanted one more, and we all pretended that was a normal thing for a body to be able to decide. After the funeral, the house got very quiet and very male and very certain of itself, and I understood with total clarity that the only person who had ever thought my particular kind of mind was a gift was now in the ground at Mount Pleasant, and that I had better get out. I got into Waterloo, civil. I didn't tell my father, I replied. I found out I got in standing at the main box in the snow, and I read the letter 4 times before I let myself believe it. There was money attached. A scholarship plus co-op, which meant I could pay my own way and never ask him for $1. I came inside glowing with it. I put the letter on the kitchen table where he was doing the firm's books, and I waited for the thing I'd been waiting for my whole life. He read it. He set it down. He said, "Civil's fine. You'll come into the firm after." Not a question. And when I said quietly that I wasn't sure I wanted to build towers, that I wanted to study why structures fail, that there was a whole field now in forensic and risk engineering, he laughed. Not cruelly even. That was somehow worse. He laughed like I'd said I wanted to study unicorns. "You want to be the person who shows up after," he said, "and tells the people who actually did something what they did wrong. That's not engineering. That's a coroner with a calculator." I didn't argue. I'd learned not to argue. I went up to my room and I held my grandfather's iron ring. My mother had left it to me, not to my brother, which my father never forgave. And I made myself a promise I was far too young to understand the weight of. I'm going to be so good at hearing what buildings say that I'll never have to write a name in a margin. And the first name I'm going to stop being afraid of is yours. It took me a long time. The profession is not kind to the quiet ones, and it is not kind to women, and it is especially not kind to women named after a legend who is still alive and still telling rooms that their work is a feelings report. I did the unglamorous jobs. I went back into structures after fires and floods and partial collapses, and I read them like my grandfather read them slowly in the margins. I got a reputation. Younger engineers started calling me when a project felt wrong, but they couldn't say why on paper. Bring in the canary, they'd say. Half a joke. Canary in the coal mine. The one who notices the air change before anyone else can. I caught a precast connection error on a hospital parkade in Hamilton before they poured the topping slab. I caught a soil report that had been quietly massaged on a condo in North York, flagged it to the city, got the project halted, got sued for it, won. I caught the thing on the humble line that got me the medal and the whole reason my father stood up at that dinner. A foundation that had been signed off as sound and wasn't, under drawings stamped, I would later learn by an engineer who worked for my father's firm. I should have heard that. The building was telling me even then I was just still, after all those years, the kind of daughter who didn't want to hear it about her own family. Here is the part I have never told the way it actually felt. 18 months before that awards dinner, my brother called me. Out of nowhere, warm the way he could turn warmth on like a tap. The firm had a problem. The Brightwater development out in the west suburbs, a big mixed-use thing, 2 towers on a shared podium, a 4-story parkade underneath, was behind schedule, and the city was asking hard questions about the concrete on the lower levels. They needed a third-party engineer of record to do the structural sign-off on the parkade before they could pour the podium and keep the financing alive. An independent name. A clean name. A name with a public safety medal even. My name. Dad's idea, my brother said, and I should have heard that too. He wants to bury the hatchet. He knows he's been hard on you. He said, get the canary, she's the best there is, and if she signs it, nobody in this province can say a word. He let that sit. It's good money, but that's not why I'm calling. He said your name, Martin. He said you're the best there is. I want you to understand that I was 31 years old, and I had been waiting my entire life to hear my father say I was the best there is. I knew, somewhere in the margins of myself, that something was off. The timeline was too tight. The previous engineer had left the project and nobody would say why, but I wanted the warmth more than I wanted to be careful, and that is the only genuinely stupid thing I have ever done in my professional life, and a man died because of it. I went out to Brightwater on a grey Thursday in late October, the first real cold snap, frost on the rebar. The parkade was a cavern of grey columns and unfinished ramps, lit by work lights smelling of wet concrete and diesel. There was a crew finishing the 3rd level. There was a kid up on the deck, an apprentice 22, named Matteo, with a toque pushed back off his forehead and earbuds in, who waved at me when I came in because I'd given a talk at his college once, and he remembered me. I remember being touched that he remembered me. I had my grandfather's notebooks in my head and a course sample report in my hand, and within 20 minutes I knew the report was lying. The concrete strength numbers on the page did not match what my eyes and my little rebound hammer were telling me about the columns in front of me. The building was telling me loudly. I got on the phone to the site super to stop work on the upper deck, and I was halfway through the sentence when the south ramp let go. There's no drama to it in real life. That's the thing nobody tells you. A structure doesn't groan a warning like in the movies. There's a crack like the whole world clearing its throat, and then there's just no floor where the floor was. A section of the level 3 deck came down onto level 2, and I went with the edge of it, and a column sheared past my shoulder, close enough to take the skin off, and I landed on rubble in the dark with my own blood warm on my collarbone, and a ringing in my ears so total it felt like silence. Matteo was on the deck that came down. The crew got me out in 20 minutes. It took them 4 hours to get him, and when they did, it didn't matter anymore. 22 years old. He'd remembered my talk. I have never once let myself forget his name, because my grandfather taught me what the margins are for. I spent 9 days in a hospital in Mississauga with a shattered collarbone and 3 cracked vertebrae and a concussion that made the lights hurt for a month. My father came once. He stood at the foot of the bed in his good coat, and he said the thing he said. which was that these things happened on a site, that I shouldn't have stopped the crew, that the stoppage had spooked the men and caused the panic that caused the collapse. He said it gently. He'd come to comfort me in his mind. He'd come to tell his injured daughter that the building falling down was, in some way he genuinely believed, her fault for noticing. My brother didn't come at all. He sent flowers. The card said, "Get well," no signature, and I lay there looking at it with the morphine making everything slow, and I thought in the margin of myself what I'd been refusing to write for 31 years, he knew. He set me here. The clean name, the medal. If it held, they'd have used my signature to bury the bad concrete forever. And if it fell, the way it fell, the engineer of record was me, the independent, the estranged daughter with something to prove, not the firm, never the firm. That is the moment I stopped being their daughter and became the person who reads the weak point in any structure, including a family. I couldn't walk properly for 2 months, so I worked the way I knew how, which is in documents. A friend helped me. His name is Wesley. Wes. A records and controls guy I'd met on the Humber job, the kind of meticulous, underpaid, invisible person that every project depends on and nobody thanks. Wes had worked a contract for my father's firm 2 years earlier and still had access to a document archive nobody had thought to lock him out of, because nobody ever thinks about the document controller. He pulled everything on Brightwater. Concrete test logs, inspection sign-offs, email chains, the whole quiet paper skeleton of a building. It took us a month of evenings, me on a heating pad with a laptop, Wes on a video call eating dinner over his keyboard. And then, on a Tuesday, he found it. There was a core sample log, the real one, the original lab results on the lower level concrete, failing numbers. Way out of spec, dated 4 months before the collapse. Somebody at my father's firm had received those results, understood exactly what they meant, and commissioned a second report with cleaned up numbers. The report I'd been handed, the report I'd been brought in to put my clean medal winning name beneath. They knew the parkade was bad. They knew for 4 months, they sent me into it anyway, because a failed independent engineer is a tragedy, and the failed firm is a bankruptcy. But that wasn't the thing that made me put my hand over my mouth alone in my apartment at 1 in the morning. The thing was a contract amendment Wes found buried 3 folders deep, a remediation agreement with the concrete subcontractor, a quiet deal to fix the lower levels in exchange for a waiver of liability, and a great deal of money moving in directions it shouldn't. A real engineer would understand instantly what that document was. It was a confession. You don't sign a remediation deal for a defect you don't know exists. It was dated the day after the ramp came down, the day after Matteo died. They had the paperwork to cover the cost of fixing it drawn up and signed within 24 hours of a man dying, which meant the paperwork had been sitting ready, which meant they had always known they'd have to fix it, which meant the only open question had ever been whether I'd sign off and let them do it slowly and quietly, or whether they'd have to wait for it to fall. And the digital signature at the bottom of that amendment, the authorizing partner, the one whose stamp made the money move, was my father's. I sat in the dark with that document glowing on the screen and I waited to feel rage. It didn't come, not the way I expected. What came was a strange, cold quiet, the quiet of a structure that has finally stopped lying to you. I had spent my whole life trying to earn the approval of a man who, it turned out, had been willing to let me die under his own bad concrete, to protect his own name. There was nothing left in that to be angry at. There was only the work. I did it properly. That's the part I'm proud of, if I'm allowed to be proud of any of it. I didn't leak it to a reporter. I didn't burn it down in a blaze. I took it to the Regulator, to the discipline committee the old woman ran, the one who'd stood up for me at the dinner. And I sat across the table from her and laid it all out in order. The real lab results, the doctored report, the amendment dated the day after. The chain of custody Wes had documented so carefully you couldn't argue with a single link of it. She read it without a word for a long time. Then she took off her glasses and she said, "You understand what this is?" "It's a confession," I said. "It's a confession," she agreed. And then, quieter, your grandfather sat on the panel that wrote the rule you're about to use. He'd have done exactly this. It would have broken his heart, and he'd have done exactly this. There was a coroner's inquest into Mateo's death, and there was a discipline hearing, and there was, eventually, the thing my family had spent 3 generations believing could never touch them, a crown prosecution. My father did not go to jail right away. His lawyers and his rank and his 50 years of reputation bought him procedural courtesy and time, the way they always do. But his license was revoked. After 51 years, the regulator pulled his pienging. My brothers, too. The firm with his name on half the skyline lost its name, lost its bonding, lost everything. And the men who'd worked for him learned what I'd known since I was 10, which is that a building is always telling you, and the only sin that can't be forgiven in this work is deciding not to listen. My brother called me once, before the charges, screaming, said I'd destroyed the family, that Mum would be ashamed, that I'd torn down everything our father built over a piece of paper and a dead labourer I didn't even know. I let him finish. Then I said the only true thing I had left to say to him. You sent me to die in that pocket to protect a balance sheet. I didn't tear anything down. I just stopped holding it up. And I hung up, and I have not spoken to him since, and I sleep fine. My father asked to see me after. I almost didn't go. But I went. For me and not for him. The way you go back into a collapsed structure one last time to understand exactly how it failed. We met at a cafe in Lycide, a bright little place with big windows looking out on a snowy street. Families with strollers and steamed-up glass and somebody's toddler having a meltdown over a hot chocolate. Ordinary, warm, alive, everything our house had never been. He looked old. Smaller. The granite had cracked. He didn't apologize. I knew he wouldn't. He said the numbers had been a judgment call. He said in 50 years he'd cut corners that held and that the public never knew about and that no one ever died and that I'd had bad luck and a worse temperament. He said I'd always been my mother's, never his, like that explained it. And then at the end, looking out the window and not at me, he said the closest thing to the truth he was capable of. You were the only one of us who'd have caught it. He said, if I'd put you on it from the start instead of using you, you'd have stopped it. He meant it as a compliment. He meant it as grief. He could not understand that he had just confessed to me, again, over a flat white, that he'd known I was the best and had still chosen to spend me like a stamp. I put down my coffee. I told him the metal remembers so that you don't have to. His own father-in-law's line. He didn't recognize it. And that, finally, was the thing that let me stand up and put my coat on and walk out into the snow and not look back. Not the license, not the charges, none of it. Just the small, complete understanding that he had never even heard the thing my grandfather had spent a lifetime trying to teach all of us. The building had been telling him for 50 years. He decided not to be the kind of man who hears it, and nothing I could ever have done, no medal, no perfect signature, no lifetime of waiting, would have made him hear me either. I don't do failure analysis anymore. I couldn't for a while. Every sight smelled like that parkade. The old woman from the dinner pulled some strings and I took a teaching post, structural ethics and forensic engineering, at a university I won't name to keep some privacy. I built a course nobody had ever quite built before. I teach young engineers how to read the margins, how to hear what a structure is telling them before it's a number on a report, how to be the person in the room who says the unwelcome thing, and how to survive it when the room turns on you, because it will. On the first day, I don't talk about load pass. I talk about Matelo. 22, Took pushed back, earbuds in, waved at me because he remembered my talk. I tell them his name out loud so that it lives in a margin in each of them too. And then I show them the iron ring on my own working hand, the rough one my grandfather wore, and I tell them what it's for, and I watch it land on the ones who are going to be good at this, the quiet ones, the strange ones, the ones who read the inquest transcripts at the kitchen table while everyone else watches the game. There's a small plaque on my office door. I didn't ask for it. Wes had it made, the records man, the invisible one who found the document that ended an empire. It doesn't have my name on it. It says, in plain letters, the canary. The students think it's a joke. The good ones figure out by about week 6 that it isn't. A package came in the spring. No return address, but I knew the handwriting on the custom slip. My aunt's my mother's sister, the only person from that side I still take calls from. Inside, no letter. Just a photograph, soft at the corners from being carried in a wallet. Me at 10, cross-legged on the floor of the old house in the GTA, my grandfather's field notebook spread around me in a fan, my face bent low over the margins, so absorbed I hadn't known the camera was there. My aunt had written one line on the back. He asked me to send you this. He said it's how he wants to remember you. Not sorry. Not even close to sorry, but an old man, somewhere, looking at the daughter who'd read the building right when he couldn't, and choosing to remember her at 10 years old, already listening for the thing he'd spent his whole life deciding to ignore. I pinned the photo to the corkboard beside my desk, right under the plaque that says, The Canary, the two of them side by side. And I sat there a long time looking at that little girl with her grandfather's notebooks fanned around her like wings, and for the first time since I was 16 years old, I didn't feel sorry for her, and I didn't feel angry at the people who'd made her so lonely. I just felt the rough edge of the ring on my finger, and I thought, you heard it, kiddo. You always heard it. And then I turned back to my work because there was a new class coming in at 10, and somewhere in that room would be one quiet kid nobody claps for. And it was my job now to make sure they knew their whole life that the thing the rest of the world calls weakness is the only reason anything stays standing at all. The thing I keep coming back to, all these years later, is that nothing in this story was an accident. My father didn't fall because the universe decided to balance a scale. He fell because he made a choice 4 months before that ramp came down to look at a failing concrete report and decide he was bigger than the numbers. Every collapse has a cause you can trace back with your finger, and his was simple. He believed his name could hold up a building that the building itself was telling him would not stand. Matteo died from that belief. I nearly did too. And the only reason the truth ever came out is that one quiet records man named Wesley still had access to a folder nobody thought to lock, and one stubborn woman raised by a grandfather who wrote names in margins refused, finally, to stop listening. I don't think you become the kind of person who can do what I did by accident either. It gets built in you, slowly, the way anything load-bearing gets built. The first part is the hardest to teach and the easiest to lose, and it's the willingness to say the true thing in a room that doesn't want to hear it, even when the person you're disappointing is the one whose approval you've wanted your whole life. I waited 31 years to learn that my father's good opinion was never going to be worth a single corner cut on a parquet full of working people. That's not bitterness. That's just the math of it, finally done honestly. The second part is the part everyone thinks they have and most people don't, which is the patience to actually read what's in front of you instead of what you wish was there. My grandfather called it the harder kind of smart. Anybody can run a calculation. Far fewer can sit with the discomfort of a number that doesn't sit right and keep asking why until the lie shows itself. That's not a gift you're born with. It's a habit you build, one core sample, one margin note, one uncomfortable Tuesday at a time. And the last part, the part nobody claps for, is just the refusal to fall over. I spent 2 months unable to walk, and I built that case from a heating pad. The room turned on me. My own brother screamed that I destroyed the family. I learned that the people who tell you you're betraying them are almost always the ones who already betrayed you first. Standing back up after that, again and again, when it would have been so much easier to take the flowers with no signature and stay quiet, that was the whole thing. That was everything. If you take one piece of this with you, let it be this. The world will try to tell you that the part of you that notices what's wrong, the part that can't stop asking the uncomfortable question, is your weakness. It is not. It is the only reason anything stays standing. Be the person who hears what the building is telling you. And when they laugh at you for it, the way my father laughed at me at that kitchen table, just remember that someday the room is going to stand, and it will not be standing for him.